Hi guys, I'm so excited to show you how to make this simple top-down raglan sweater. It's made with 9mm needles with chunky yarn, so it's a pretty quick knit. I made it very simple. There's no neckline shaping, there's no body shaping, and there's no decreases at the arms except for the cuffs. So it is a great sweater to start with if you are a newer knitter. It's fun for the more advanced if you're looking to make something simple and quick. It's a great foundational sweater if you want to use this as the basis for doing something more unique and different, using different stitches or different colors, but there's lots of different options for the sweater. I do have a PDF of the sweater pattern available for you, so just make sure you check out the description and click on the link to download the PDF pattern of the sweater. Hi guys, I just wanted to take a little time to go over the pattern with you so you understand how to read the pattern if you're newer to knitting. But basically, as far as size guide and finished measurements, I wanted to show you how to figure out what size you should make. The sizes are listed in 8 different sizes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the finished bust sizes are 37 inch, 40, 43, 46 and a half, 49 and a half, 53, 56, and 59 inches. The sweater is meant to fit very oversized at about 6 to 10 inches in positive ease. So you want to make sure you pick a size that will give you either that ease or the ease you want. So if you only want a few inches of positive ease, you'll probably want to go down in size. So basically, look at the finished measurements, the finished bust size, and kind of pick out your size accordingly. So when you read a pattern, I just wanted to quickly note, if you are making a size 3, you will follow the third number anytime anything is listed throughout the pattern. So if it says to knit 8, basically you just select a size 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then the corresponding number when you see groups of numbers listed together. I like to take a marker and print it out and circle all of the different numbers that apply to the size that I'm making. In the sweater tutorial, I made a size 3. So when you follow along with the video, you will see me making a size 3, which is about 43 inches for a finished bust. I have about a 36-inch bust, and I made a finished bust size of 43 inches. So that just gives you a little bit idea. So that's 6 inches of positive ease. So there are the needle sizes listed, the notions, the gauge, abbreviations, and then we start with the instructions for the yoke, and then how to start the raglan increases, how to divide for the body, how to knit the body, and then how to knit the sleeves. And that's basically it. It's pretty straightforward, but I just wanted to take a little bit of time to kind of explain sizing and how to read the pattern, and also to let you know that in the tutorial I am making a size 3. To make this sweater, you will need at least 3 skeins of this Lion brand Respun Thick and Quick yarn. I made about a medium size, and I used 2 full skeins and then a little bit more of a third skein. So to be safe, I suggest getting at least 3 skeins. If you know you're making a much larger size than like a medium, I would say get 4 to be safe. This color is called Pumice Stone. And just for reference, there are 223 yards, 204 meters in one skein. It is considered a super bulky weight yarn. And just a heads up, this is a pretty large skein. So if you are using a different kind of yarn with different yardage or meters in the skein, just try to adjust accordingly. All right, you will also need a tape measure. You will need scissors. You will need a tapestry needle to weave in ends. You will need some scrap yarn to put the sleeve stitches on. And as far as needles go, we are only working in 9mm needles, okay? I cast on using a 24-inch needle. You will need a 16-inch needle, and you will need anything over like a 35, 36-inch knitting needle. We are using 9mm needles, and that is a US 13. So you will need a 24-inch for the collar and the neck. You will need a longer 35-inch, 36-inch, and then you will need a 16-inch 9mm needle. So those are the supplies you will need. And just for reference with circular needles, they're usually measured from tip to tip about. So just so you know how to figure out the length of a circular needle. All right, we are going to start knitting the collar for our top-down sweater. And I am knitting a size where I cast on 56 stitches. So I am going to wrap the yarn around here about 10 times, 3, 6, 9, 10 times, so I can get the length of yarn I need for about 10 stitches for a long tail cast on. And so now I am going to multiply this length so that I have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. Yes, I'm only casting on 56 stitches, but I'm just going a little bit over for 60, and then that's just a rough estimate. So now we are going to make a slip knot. And this slip knot counts as our first stitch. We're going to put that on our 24-inch 9mm circular knitting needle. We're going to put our tail in front of us. And we are going to cast on a total of 56 stitches. So that's one stitch. Grab the yarn under the yarn around your thumb, over the yarn around your index finger, and pull through. That's 2. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Make sure the yarn's not too tight or too loose. This will go over your head, so you really want to make sure it's not crazy tight so that you can fit your head through the collar. So I will meet you back here when I've got 56 stitches cast on. So I have cast on 56 stitches. Now it is time to join in the round. And just note, you're going to want to have one stitch marker, the color for the beginning of round marker, and then these stitch markers we will put in the middle of the work to denote the separation between the fronts and the backs and the sleeves. So just set those aside. We're going to want to make sure we join our work so that it's not twisted. And I like to do that by kind of putting the work down and making sure all of the cast on stitches are facing on the inside there. And we have 56 stitches. We are actually going to cast on one more stitch, and we're going to drop that stitch to connect the work. So we have 56. I am going to cast on 57. I'm going to make sure my stitches are not twisted. They're laying all on the inside. And I'm going to, it's a little tight on this 24-inch needle, but it should work. The first round might be a little tight, and then it'll get easier after that. So to join in the round, we are going to move the last stitch on the left needle over to the right-hand needle. We are going to move that last stitch we just cast on the right-hand needle over the stitch we just moved, and then you're just going to drop that stitch and pull. And now we are going to put our stitch marker on, our beginning of round marker. And now we're just going to start a 1 by 1 rib, which means we knit one stitch, bring the yarn to the front, purl one stitch, knit one stitch, purl one stitch. So you continue this all the way around, knit one, purl one, until you get to the end, and I'll show you what it looks like then. All right, I am nearing the end of my first knit one, purl one, or 1x1 rib round for the collar. You should end on a purl stitch because there's an even number of stitches and we're knitting one and purling one. So when you get to the end, try not to drop the marker, but when you get to the end, you just slide the marker over. You can do that by just going like that. And then you're going to continue knitting the knit stitches and purling the purl stitches. So it's just knit one, purl one. And you can see now that the 1x1 rib is starting to come together. So you're going to continue the 1x1 rib for a total of 6 rounds. And just to show you, you can kind of count the rounds you have. You can see that one knit stitch, 2 knit stitches there. So I know I have 2 rounds completed there. So I will meet you back here when you've completed 6 rounds of the 1x1 rib. So I've completed 6 rounds of the 1x1 rib. Now we're going to complete a raglan setup round. And basically, we have 56 stitches that we've cast on. I need to divide these 56 stitches into each sleeve and the front and back. There are 4 sections, and I need to do that in a way that makes sense for each sleeve in the front and back. So I am going to knit across the first sleeve for 8 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're going to place a marker. So that is the right sleeve. Those 8 stitches will grow to become the right sleeve. Now we're going to knit across 20 stitches for the front. 1, 2, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. 20 stitches for the front. Now we're going to knit across 8 stitches for the left sleeve. And now we should have 20 stitches left to knit across the back. So we've divided our work into 4 sections. So just to show you, if we were looking at it like this, this would be the right sleeve, front, this would be the left sleeve, and this is the back of the work. So we are gonna now work on a raglan increase row where we will increase 2 stitches on either side of the marker. So we have 4 stitch markers. So we will be increasing 8 times for each raglan increase round. So if we have 8 stitches for the sleeve here, we will have 10 stitches when we are done. If we have 20 stitches for the front, we will have 22 stitches. Each sleeve will grow the same amount, and the front and the back will grow the same amount. So that's just something to keep in mind as you keep track of your stitches. And it just kind of gives you the big picture of how we knit raglan increase rounds. All right, so I am going to show you how to make your raglan increase round. You're going to want to slip the stitch marker. We are going to knit 1 stitch after the stitch marker, and now we're going to increase a stitch, and we're going to increase a stitch so that it slants to the left. And to do that, we're going to do what's called a make 1 left, where we insert the needle in the work from the front to the back on that little bar that goes across. So insert the needle from the front to the back, so that's basically adding a loop. We are going to knit through the back. So you're going to put your needle through the back and just knit the stitch. So you can see that the stitch kind of slants over to the left a little bit there. Then we are going to knit across that right sleeve until we get to 1 stitch before the next stitch marker. So here we are, 1 stitch before the next stitch marker. Now we need to make 1 right, and we do that by inserting the needle from the back to the front in that bar in between those 2 stitches. Back to the front, and then we're going to knit through the front. And now we have a stitch that leans to the right. We're going to knit 1, slip the marker, knit 1. Now we're going to make 1 left. Insert the needle front to the back and knit through the back. And we're going to keep going all the way across to that beginning of round marker, repeating what we just did. So we're going to knit to 1 stitch before the next marker. Now we're going to make 1 that leans to the right by inserting the needle from the back to the front and knitting through the front. Knit 1, slip the marker, knit 1, make 1 left. Insert the needle from the front to the back and knit it through the back. Knit to 1 stitch before the next stitch marker. Make 1 that leans to the right, insert the needle from the back to the front, and knit it through the front. Knit 1, slip the marker, knit 1, make 1 left. Insert the needle from the front to the back, knit through the back. And now we are on the back of the work. So we are going to do 1 last increase. So we knit to 1 stitch before the beginning of round. All right, we're going to do our last increase since this is the beginning of round marker. And this one we insert the needle from the back to the front because we need to make 1 that leans to the right. Knit. And then we knit 1, and then we are done with our first raglan increase round. So we've increased 8 stitches. So if we started off with 8 stitches on our right sleeve, we should have 10 now. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. We should have 22 stitches for the front and the back. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22. I'm just going to check this other sleeve that I have 10. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And this back should have 22. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22. All right, so, you don't have to do that every round, but if you're a newer knitter and you want to make sure you're hitting all of your increases, you should make sure you have increased 8 stitches on each round. So now once we've finished a raglan increase round, we are going to just simply knit 1 round all the way around. And so we will be completing a raglan increase round followed by a knit round. You always want to make sure you've got a knit round in between a raglan increase round. So you just knit up to the marker and you just simply slip the marker and just keep knitting all the way around.
Now you just keep knitting a raglan increase round followed by a knit round.
So I have knit 6 increase rounds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I should have 12 additional stitches on each section if I've made 6 raglan increase rounds. So if I started with 8 for each sleeve, I should have 20 stitches for each sleeve. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. And if I had 20 stitches starting for the front and back, I should have 32 stitches on both the front and the back. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, 32. So it's good to just stop and check your stitch count every once in a while just to make sure you're increasing correctly on both sleeves and both the front and the back. I wanted to take some time to show you how to switch your circular needle to a longer needle once you start getting a ton of stitches on your 24-inch needle. So it's pretty simple. I suggest doing it not on a raglan increase round, just doing it on a knit round so you don't have a ton going on at once, but feel free to do what you like. I stopped just before the end of the round here, and I am going to knit my last stitch, slip the marker, and I usually pull my my needle all the way through so this doesn't slip off. I'm actually going to knit one stitch here just to keep the marker in place, and now I'm going to pull that needle through. I'm going to take my new needle, and we're just going to knit off the smaller needle onto the longer needle. And this is just a knit round, so you just knit all the way across, taking the stitches off of your shorter needle and moving them onto the longer needle. This is just good to do once you have a ton of stitches. You've increased a lot, and you just kind of want more space as you're knitting, so you can switch it to longer circular needles. So just continue this all the way around. I'm nearing the end of that knit round where I'm switching needles, and I only have 4 more stitches left on my old needle, and then I will have every stitch on the new needle. All right, so now you can see I have a little bit more room. The stitches aren't quite as bunched, and now I can continue on. I wanted to take some time here just to show you where I am and how much farther I have to go before I divide for the body. So I am continuing on until I have 50 stitches in the front and the back. So I had 20 stitches for the front and the back originally, and I'm going to 50 stitches. And so 50 minus 20 is 30. And if I divide that by 2, that's 15. So that's 15 increases I need to do, 15 rounds of raglan increases I need to knit to get to my desired width. And I have completed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I need to go to 15. So I know that I need to make 9 more raglan increase rounds to get to 50 stitches on the front. So same thing with the sleeves. If I started with 8 stitches and I am increasing 15 times, that's 30 stitches, so that I will end up having 38 stitches on each sleeve. So we're going to continue around doing the raglan increase rounds followed by a knit round until I have 50 stitches on the front and the back and 38 stitches for each sleeve. And I just wanted to say at this point, as you get to your desired width, stop and take some time. You can take your stitches off of the needle and take a tapestry needle and put all the stitches on a piece of scrap yarn and put this on over your head to see how it's fitting. So just some simple math. I know that 10 stitches is 4 inches. So if I'm getting to 50 stitches, that is 4 times 5 inches. So that is 20 inches that I am going to get to for the front and 20 inches I'm getting to for the back. Plus I'm going to cast on 4 stitches on each side at the underarm. So that will be 108 stitches for my bust. And so I am making this quite oversized for myself. Not super oversized, but I'm about a 36, 37 inch bust. So this will be well over, 40 inches. It'll be 42 inches around the bust. So that just gives you an idea of how I calculate the math for deciding how many raglan increase rows to figure out, how wide I want the sweater to be. All right, so now I'm at the point where I have completed 15 raglan increases. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay, so I have 50 stitches on the front and the back. And I have 38 stitches for each sleeve. And now it is time to divide for the body. And when you're ready to divide for the body, you want to make sure you end right after that raglan increase row. You want this next row to just be a knit round when we divide for the body. So just make sure you keep that in mind. You're going to want to make sure you have a tapestry needle handy with a piece of waste yarn that's long enough to put one whole sleeve on. So I've got a piece of yarn that's long, and I'm going to show you how to divide for the body. So remember, our first group of stitches is a sleeve. So we're going to move all of these stitches onto scrap yarn. We're going to knit across the front. We're going to move all of the other sleeve stitches onto a piece of scrap yarn. So we begin knitting in the round, but we're omitting the sleeves. So we're taking off the sleeve stitches now, and we're just going to connect the front and the back. And we're going to connect them by casting on 4 stitches on either side. So those 4 stitches on either side, 8 stitches, will also be added to the inside of the sleeve as well. So if we have 38 stitches for a sleeve, we will end up with 42 stitches. Same thing on the other side. It can be a little confusing to visually understand what's going on here, but like I said, we're going to be taking off the sleeve stitches, so we're just knitting around the body. And then we will come back and put those sleeve stitches back on a knitting needle and knit those separately. So we're going to knit to the beginning of round. We're going to slip off that stitch marker, and because this first section is a sleeve, we're going to take our tapestry needle and we're going to take off all of these sleeve stitches and put them on a piece of scrap yarn. So just use your tapestry needle to slip all of these stitches off, and this is the right sleeve, because when we wear it, it ends up on our right arm. And just continue to push all of these stitches forward. And we're nearing to the end of that marker, and when we get to this marker, we know that's the end of our sleeve stitches. All right, so now we're gonna take off this marker. We're gonna pull that scrap yarn through, that waste yarn through the sleeve here, and then you're just gonna make sure that the yarn is through securely on both sides and it has enough space that the stitches aren't going to fall off. And then you can remove the tapestry needle. And now we have our needle, one needle over here and one needle over here with our sleeve stitches here. We're going to join the work now. This is when the sweater actually starts to look like a sweater. So we're gonna bring our work together and join these ends, but we need to cast on stitches for our underarm. And typically when you make a raglan sweater, you're gonna cast on some sort of stitches for the underarm. Now I'm gonna cast on 4 stitches. If you would like it to be more or less, feel free. Just make sure, I would say just cast on at least 2. It just helps to provide a little bit more space at the underarm. So I am going to just use a simple backwards loop cast on method to cast on stitches at the underarm. So that's 1, and it's called backwards loop because we're just making a backwards loop. And you need to do a backwards loop because you need to make sure that this yarn comes out in front of this cast on stitch instead of in the back. That makes it a little bit easier to knit through. These stitches tend to be a little looser at the underarm, which is fine. I usually go back and seam up my armholes. All right, so we've got our stitches cast on, and now we're simply going to just join the work here and start knitting. And again, this might be a little looser. And I like to go back and just kind of seam up my armholes at the end. But now, you know what I forgot to do? At this point, I forgot to put my stitch marker in the center of the cast on stitches. So I'm actually going to go back. So you can see that if you forget to do that, how to go back. So I have 2 cast on stitches. I am going to put my stitch marker here and cast on those 2 stitches and join and just keep knitting here, knitting around. So you're gonna knit around, and this is the back. Again, it doesn't really matter because the front and the back are the same. We didn't do any neckline shaping or anything. So once you get to this end, once you get to the end where this next stitch marker is, we're going to do the same thing. All right, so I'm nearing the end of the back, and once I get to that next stitch marker to denote where the next sleeve is, this is the next sleeve, so we're going to take all of these stitches off now. We're going to remove this stitch marker, and we are going to take our other piece of scrap yarn with our tapestry needle and take these stitches off again. So we're doing the same thing we did before. Just take your time and get all of these stitches off of the needle. All right, I'm nearing the end of this other sleeve here. And I'm going to take the stitch marker off. I'm going to pull this yarn through the scrap yarn, get the tail out, and I'm going to make sure I've got enough space for my stitches to kind of sit comfortably. We're going to cast on the underarm stitches, half of the underarm stitches, 1, 2. I'm going to put a different color stitch marker. I have a pink stitch marker on this side. That will now be our new beginning of round marker. And so I cast on 2 stitches. I'm going to put on a different color stitch marker, use the backwards loop cast on method to cast on 2 more stitches. And now I'm going to join the work, join the front and the back, and just knit all the way across to the beginning of the round. All right, I'm nearing the end of just knitting our the round where we divided for the body, and I just want to show you how to knit these cast on stitches. It can be a little bit difficult and they will be a little loose, but you just knit them as you would knit a regular stitch. My yarn is a little split there, but just continue working the yarn as you know normally. You just knit through those loops. You're going to slip the marker for the beginning of the round. And we are going to be continuing just knitting each round until it's time to do the bottom ribbing. Everybody, you know, this is how you can really customize The body of your sweater, I do suggest trying on as you go, which means transferring these stitches to a piece of waste yarn and pulling the sweater over your head and seeing how long it is on your body. I am probably going to continue for about, 11 inches or so and try it on and see how it's fitting me. I'll probably do a total of 13 inches from the underarm. Just knitting from experience, I know that's what fits me well. I do want this to be a shorter sweater, a little bit shorter. And our bottom ribbing is going to be the same length as the collar ribbing, 6 rounds. So it's, it's about an inch and a half or so. Let's see, let's measure. Might be a little bit more. Yeah, it's closer to 2 inches. So just keep in mind that the bottom ribbing will add 2 inches. So if we go to 11 inches from the underarm cast on, we'll need to make sure we account for the fact that our bottom ribbing will add 2 more inches. So that's a total of 13 inches from the underarm cast on. So continue just knitting in the round. And when you think you're, about 2 inches before the total length of your of the body of the sweater from the cast on edge, that's when you want to stop and try it on. I would suggest knitting to, between 10 or 11 inches and then trying the sweater on and seeing how the length is. If you want it really cropped, obviously you can stop before then. If you know you want it much longer, you can stop after that point. But I do suggest trying on the sweater if you're trying to make it kind of a customized fit for yourself. Every sweater fits differently, especially if the armhole depth is bigger or longer than, another sweater you've made before or another sweater that you have. But yeah, what I also suggest doing is using a sweater that you may have that's, store-bought, that you love, that fits you well, and just kind of looking at the overall measurements and seeing what those are. And you can kind of, use those measurements as a reference to figure out the length, whether it's the armhole length or the width or, just use a sweater that fits you well as a reference for the measurements on the sweater that you're making. All right, so just continue knitting here until you stop to try on the sweater. And I'll just show you again how to knit those cast on stitches. They can be a bit tricky. And this yarn does tend to split. So just be careful and knit these underarm cast on stitches slowly and carefully. Again, they will be a little looser, but that will end up coming together. All right. So I will meet you back here once I have completed the most of the length of the body of the sweater. I did want to take some time to stop and show you though first what the sweater is looking like now that we have taken off the sleeves and divided for the body and we're just knitting in the round. And then when we pick up the sleeves, when we knit the sleeves later, we will also pick up those 4 stitches at the underarm and knit in the round. So I have 108 stitches for the body, just for reference. And the front and the back are identical. We don't have any neckline shaping. This is just meant to be kind of a simple, basic sweater. I didn't add in any shaping. But now you can tell our sweater is a sweater now that we've divided for the body. So I will meet you back here after I've completed a significant portion of the stockinette stitch for the body. I just wanted to show you what to do when you are nearing the end of your first skein of yarn. And it's great when I use this Lion Brand Respun yarn, I was able to knit this much of the sweater with just one skein. The skeins are really large. So I'm about to just join my second skein here. And you want to leave enough tail here from your first one to knit about 4 stitches or so. You take your new piece of yarn, make sure you have a little tail hanging here. And what you're going to do is basically knit double. So you've got a little tail from the first one on this side, a little tail from the new skein on this side, and you're just going to knit double for about 4 stitches. And you won't be able to tell, you'll barely be able to tell, and then you just drop that tail from the old skein, and basically you have woven in your ends by knitting those 2 pieces of yarn together. So at the end, you can just trim off those tails because they're already woven in. So I just wanted to take a second to show you what the sweater is looking like as I have knit the body. I think I am at about, let's see, I'm going to measure to see how far I am from the underarm cast on. I am at about almost 5 inches or so. So that just gives you a little perspective. I'm going to stop probably in another 5 inches and see how the sweater is fitting. And again, if you want to try the sweater on to see how it's fitting you, take a tapestry needle and a very long piece of scrap yarn. You'll need a piece of yarn that goes all the way around the sweater to hold all the stitches plus a tail. And you can just remove all the stitches from the circular knitting needle onto a piece of scrap yarn and pull it over you just to see how it's fitting. And then you can just take your knitting needle and put the stitches back on to the needles and continue knitting. So I will see you back here once I have finished the length of the body of the sweater before I start the bottom ribbing. And remember, the bottom ribbing will add about 2 inches of length to the sweater. All right, so now I'm at the point where I have knit the body for about 10 inches. Just want to show you what everything's looking like overall at this point. So I've got the whole sweater here, and I've completed about 10 inches of the body, just knitting in the round. And you can see it measures about 10 inches. And now I'm going to start the bottom ribbing. And the bottom ribbing will look similar to the collar. We're going to complete that 1 by 1 rib again for 6 rounds. And then we will bind off. So I've started the knit 1 already, the beginning of the round, and now I'm going to purl. So we're just going to keep knitting 1, purling 1 for 6 rounds. And then I will show you how to bind off. So continue just knitting 1, purling 1. And then when you get to the beginning of the round, just knit the knit stitches and purl the purl stitches. All right, so I will meet you back here after I have completed 6 rounds. All right, so I'm at the point where I have knit 6 rounds in the 1 by 1 rib. I'm towards the end of my 6th round here. And once I'm at the end, I will show you how to bind off. So I'm going to take off the stitch marker here, and I will show you how to bind off. This way, I just wanted to note, there are many ways to bind off. I am showing you kind of a simple way to bind off. However, it is not super stretchy. So you don't want to bind off too tightly, or else your sweater will be too tight at the bottom. Again, there are multiple ways to bind off. This is kind of an easy, more direct, simple way to bind off. So what you do is you knit 1 stitch, you continue in the pattern, you purl 1 stitch, and then you move that first stitch over the second stitch and drop it off. So we're continuing to knit in the 1x1 rib, but we're binding off as we go. So then I'm going to move the yarn to the back and knit a knit stitch, and then keep making sure this is kind of loose here. I'm just going to continue lifting that stitch off. So you never have more than 2 stitches on at once. So continue with the purl stitch, lift that stitch over and drop it. And so now you can see we're starting to bind off. And, try to do this as evenly as possible with the tension in the yarn so that your bind off edge is as smooth as possible. So again, you keep knitting and purling and binding off, which means dropping that first stitch over the second stitch and dropping it off. You're going to continue this all of the way around until you get to the last stitch. And now you can start to see the bind off edge a little more. So continue around in this fashion until you have 1 stitch left. All right, I'm nearing the end of my bind off. You can see I've bound off all the way across. I just have a few stitches left, so I just want to show you what to do when you get to the end. So you continue until you have 1 stitch left. And then you simply take a pair of scissors when you have 1 stitch left on the needle, cut it so you have a little bit of a tail, I don't know, about 6 inches or so. And then you simply just pull the yarn through. We will go back later and weave in this end and kind of connect it to the beginning. But now we are finished with the body of the sweater. And you can see we have our hem done. All right, now we are going to start knitting a sleeve, and I'm going to show you how to knit 1 sleeve, and then you will just repeat that same process for knitting the other sleeve. So as you remember, we placed our sleeve stitches on scrap yarn. And so what we're going to want to do is take our 16-inch circular needle, and you're going to want to put the stitches from the waste yarn back onto the 16-inch circular needle. So I usually just start going across and putting them on. And a lot of times I just put the stitches on with the waste yarn in there, and then I kind of take it all off at the end, or you can pull it off as you go if you would like. But all we are doing is transferring a set of sleeve stitches from the scrap yarn back onto the 16-inch circular needle. And we're going to just go all the way around. So I've worked all the way around. That last stitch can be a little tricky because it's probably pulled a little tight. So just make sure you get that. And then it helps if you get all the stitches actually off the needle and onto the cord here. It makes it a little easier to pull out the yarn. All right, so all of our stitches, all of our sleeve stitches are on. But if you remember, we cast on 4 stitches at the underarm. So we need to start working with our yarn, and you just grab the end of your skein, and we are going to start picking up stitches. And you can see, if you look at the work, you can see that there are kind of like 1, 2, 3, 4 little stitches kind of sideways here, and we are going to put our needle into both that stitch and the stitch behind to pick up the stitches. This is how I like to pick up the stitches. And you just pull the yarn through. This can be a little bit difficult, especially to get it through both loops. And one thing I do want to note, there are many different ways to pick up stitches on the underarm. There are many different ways to prevent gapping. There are lots of different techniques. I am showing you a simple way. You will have some gaps in the underarm when you pick up stitches, when you do this way. Again, I've already mentioned this, but I like to seam up the armholes at the end. Again, this is just a simple way of doing this. So we've picked up 2 stitches and we had casted on 4 at the underarm. I'm going to place the stitch marker on the needle now to denote the middle of the underarm, and this will now become our beginning of round marker. So we're going to continue going into that stitch that's kind of sideways and the stitch right above, and pulling the yarn through to pick up stitches. So I've got 3 stitches, and you might need to keep like pulling that first stitch a little bit. This is a little wonky. And then I'm going to pick up that last stitch here. Okay, so I have 4 stitches picked up at the underarm. I've got a gap here, and then I will have a gap here when I start connecting it to that first stitch on the sleeve. So now we're simply just going to knit all the way around, and we're going to keep knitting in the round for the sleeve. I'll just show you what it starts to look like once you knit those underarm stitches. All right, so I'm coming around to end that first round of my sleeve. And again, you will have a gap, and the stitches might start to look a little bit stretched. So here's my first stitch that I cast on, or that I picked up from that cast on at the underarm. Now if you'll notice, it's a little backwards. You traditionally would knit into a stitch this way, but the way I cast it on, the stitch is on there backwards. So in all of my stitches that I pick up that first round, you'll need to knit into the stitch this way. Okay, and this will get a little stretched out. You know, you can kind of pull that yarn. I'm actually holding it right now. And you'll just continue knitting into the stitch from right to left instead of left to right, just on those stitches that you have picked up. So those are those 4 stitches that I've picked up, and now I'm just going to knit into the stitches normally from left to right instead of right to left. So this is a good time too to check and make sure you have the correct number of stitches. So if you remember from what I did, I ended up with 38 stitches after I divided for the body, and then we've casted on 4 stitches. So I have 42 stitches for this sleeve. So you're just going to continue knitting in the round stockinette stitch until you get to the desired length you would like, minus 2 inches, because we're going to do a sleeve cuff that will be about 2 inches. So now it's easy to try on the sweater now because we've finished the body. So you can actually pull this over your head and stick your arm through and kind of see how the sweater's fitting and measure and figure out how long you want your sleeve to be. And then you just continue the stockinette stitch for the length of the sleeve that you want, minus 2 inches, so you account for the cuff. So just continue knitting until you hit your desired sleeve length. So I am at the point where I have continued my sleeve to the length that I want, and also taking into account that I'm going to add about 2 inches for the cuff. And that, for me, is about 14 inches or so from the underarm. I do have kind of short arms. Everybody's arm length is so different. So I really suggest just trying this sweater on, putting your arm through, holding your arm down by your side, and seeing where the sleeve hits you and making sure you account for an additional about 2 inches. So now we are going to decrease for the sleeve cuff. A sleeve cuff at this point would be really large. So we are going to do a 1x1 rib, but we're going to decrease for the cuff. And I'm just going to zoom this in a little bit here so you can see. I'm going to finish this round, and then my decrease is going to be just a simple knit 1 and then knit 2 together. And the trick is making sure that you end up with an even number of stitches. And so we're just going to knit 1, knit 2 together by putting your needle through 2 stitches at one time, wrapping the yarn over and pulling through. You basically knit it the same way as you would knit 1 stitch. You're just inserting your needle into 2 stitches at the same time. Knitting 2 together all the way around. Okay, so I am about 3 stitches left. I'm going to count how many stitches I have now. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26. I have 26 stitches plus 3 stitches left. So that would be 29 stitches. So that's an uneven number. So I am just going to reduce one more time. I'm going to do a knit 1, knit 2 together. And so then that would be 28 stitches. Okay, so just check and make sure you're ending with an even number of stitches. I wanted to show you how to do this kind of more generically. So, depending on how many sleeve stitches, no matter how many sleeve stitches you have, you'll be able to figure this out. So I'm just showing you generally how to do this. So now we're just simply going to do a 1x1 rib by knitting 1 and purling 1 all the way across, and we are going to complete this for 6 rounds. So I will meet you back here after I've completed 6 rounds and it's time to bind off. And one thing to note, it can be tight knitting this number of stitches on a 16-inch circular needle. It can still be done, but if it's just too tight for you, you could move all of these stitches onto a double pointed needle. I tend to just continue on the circular needle even though it's a little tight. So I just wanted to mention that. You can see my stitches are a bit stretched, but it still works. So I am on my last round here, and then we will bind off. All right, I'm at the end of my 6th round here in the 1x1 rib, and now I'm simply going to bind off in the 1x1 rib exactly how we did for the body. We're going to knit 1, purl 1, and then lift that first stitch over and continue in the established pattern of knitting, bind off, purl, bind off, knit, bind off, purl, bind off. I'm almost done binding off the sleeve cuff. Pull the yarn through. We'll go back in at the end and I'll show you how to weave in all of these ends. So now we are done with one of the sleeves, and I'll just show you what the whole sweater is looking like now. So we've got our sweater looking good here. And now you'll just need to follow the directions exactly as we did the first sleeve for the second sleeve. So go ahead and remove the waste yarn and put all of these stitches on your 16-inch circular needle again. Pick up the 4 stitches at the underarm and knit in the round and complete this sleeve exactly as you did your first sleeve. All right, I have finished knitting both sleeves, and now it's time to just finish off the sweater. We've got all these ends, and I'm also going to show you how to seam up if you have any armhole gaps. So let's start with the armholes. And, you know, just one thing I wanted to say about all this, about weaving in ends and seaming up armhole gaps, there's no exact science to how to do this, so figure out what works for you. I am just going to take my yarn, I am just going to thread the yarn through the tapestry needle here. And really, I just need to close up this armhole gap, and I am just going to stick my needle through the little loops around the edge of the hole and just pull the yarn through like this. And now you can see that the armhole gap is closed up. And now I'm simply going to just thread the yarn through a few, this I think is just the armhole gap, just thread the yarn through a few stitches here just to weave in this end. And I am going to snip the yarn, and it's on the inside of the work. So that's how I seam up my armholes. Again, nothing fancy, nothing too complicated. And then, so you're just going to want to do the same thing for all of your other armholes if you have gaps. And now I'm going to show you how to just close off the ribbing and weave in that end. So you're going to want to thread your tail through the tapestry needle again. I kind of like to weave my yarn through the edge of the ribbing and just kind of pull it back through where we started. And then along the inside of the work, I usually just take my needle and go up the knit stitches up the side. And again, no exact science on how to do this. My goal is just to weave in this end so it doesn't come out. And I like doing this way because the yarn will be facing up. And I just kind of pull it a little bit and snip the work. And there you go. So just repeat weaving in the ends at the collar, in the other sleeve, and then finish up seaming up your armholes, and your sweater will be complete.